Chapter 279. Return. Boom. Just as Kang Qian's mind was spinning, a loud bang came from him. But it was Zhu Wuyin who finally began his test, as he struck his strongest attack against the force, Zhuan Stone. Instantly, a shining number appeared above the force Zhuan Stone wall 35. 35. The entire force Zhuan Hall was suddenly silent, and then a cry of shock rang out as many people were shocked. It had only been 3 years. Zhu Wuyin had already been able to achieve 35 times his score. This had to shock people. One must know that 3 years ago, Zhu Wuyin was only 30 times. But now in just a short period of time, he had already improved 5 times. Although it was only 5 times, the difference was very large. If 30 times was a Yuanying stage invincible existence, then 35 times, amongst the Yuanying stage invincibles, belonged to the top. Ha ha ha. Elder Li laughed softly, nodding his head with a smile on his face. Clearly, his favorite disciple having such an achievement made him feel very dignified. Che. Shaojin skimmed his mouth, his face full of disdain. He was only at the 4th level of the Yuanying stage right now. If he was at the 9th level of the Yuanying stage like Zhu Wuxia, his test results would definitely exceed Zhu Wuxia's. Kang Qian's face was bland, without the slightest surprise. Boosting 5 times was indeed not bad. It seemed that in these 3 years, Elder Li had spent a lot of money. Otherwise it would be impossible to boost 5 times, just by Zhu Wuyin's own bitter cultivation. Senior brother Kang Qian, are you coming to test as well? Oh, it just so happens that I've just finished testing, so come and try. Looking at his test results, a hint of complacency flashed in Zhu Wuyin's eyes. Then he walked over and smiled at Kang Qian. Only that smile was so hypocritical that even little gold on the side skimmed his mouth with a disdainful expression. Elder Li knew that this disciple of his was a bit of a goody-goody, and was especially haunted by the fact that Kang Qian had become the law enforcement elder's personal disciple. So he smiled as well and said, Kang Qian, go ahead and give it a try. He didn't have any malicious intent. He just hoped to try to dissolve Zhu Wuyin's resentment towards Kang Qian, because he was very clear that Kang Qian's achievements in the future weren't comparable to Zhu Wuyin's. HMPH. Kang Qian nodded his head indifferently, then easily walked to the force Zhuan Stone, and began to close his breath and concentrate. The Kang Qian hegemonic blood in his body began to slowly boil. This was the time for him to show his strongest fighting state. Inside the force Zhuan Hall, the crowd watched with rapt attention. Everyone was very much looking forward to it. Only Zhu Wuyin had a cold smile on his face. He didn't believe that Kang Qian would surpass him, at least not right now. Boom. Just as Zhu Wuyin sneered, Kang Qian, who had already displayed his strongest fighting form, immediately executed his overlord fist and struck his strongest blow. Without the slightest bit of fancy to speak of, it was completely an outburst of absolute power, and the miraculous force Zhuan Stone suddenly shone brightly and dazzlingly, piercing the eyes of the crowd within the great hall. Seeing the force Zhuan Stone explode with such a dazzling light, Elder Li's expression changed, and then his gaze passed through the layers of light and saw the number displayed above the force Zhuan Stone. Instantly, Elder Li's eyes shrunk as the number caused his heart to turn over, incomparably shocked. A moment later, the light above the force Zhuan Stone began to dissipate, and the people in the hall could clearly see the number displayed above the force Zhuan Stone, and at once, the entire hall fell into silence. Impossible. Zhu Wuyin also saw the numbers displayed above the force Zhuan Stone this time, and he lowly roared with a face full of incredulity, his face incomparably ugly. 45. This was the result of Kang Qian's test, causing everyone to be shocked. This was not a cultivator who had just broken through the Yuanying stage. It was completely the strength of a cultivator who had only been cultivating at the Yuanying stage for hundreds of years. The entire Zhuan Hall was silent. Everyone's gazes towards Kang Qian were filled with shock. They only realized at this moment that Kang Chon was even more of a genius than they had imagined. This purple-robed young man could not be described by common sense at all. Elderly, we'll take our leave first. Casually glancing at the numbers above the forged one stone, Kang Chon turned his head and greeted Elderly, who was in a state of shock at the side, before leaving the forged one hall with little gold. He was not surprised by the results of this test. His accumulation at the Jidan stage was too muddy. So once he broke through the Yuanying stage, the strength that erupted was naturally astonishing. This he had expected. After Kang Chon left, the Liege One Hall once again resumed its noisy scene. Everyone looked at the number above the Liege One stone that hadn't dispersed and exclaimed in shock. Only Zhu Wuin had an ugly face. His eyes were gloomy to the extreme. He was completely struck by Kang Chon's strength. That kind of talent was simply not something he could compare to. At this moment, he finally had the knowledge. More importantly, Kang Chon had not even glanced at him since the beginning. That bashful gaze made his heart suffocate, which showed that Kang Chon did not take him as an opponent at all. Zhu Wuin grimaced, his fists pinched and creaked, even though he was very unhappy in his heart. He had to admit that Kang Chon's talent was indeed far superior to his, and he might not have the chance to surpass Kang Chon in his life. On the side, Elder Li frowned. He knew that Zhu Wuin must have suffered a great blow this time, and was very worried in his heart. His favored disciple would not be devastated by this, right? To be honest, he also hoped that Kang Chon's blow this time would make Zhu Wuin see reality clearly, so that he would not compete with those geniuses anymore. In this world, all kinds of special bloodlines came out. Countless demonic prides came out. With Zhu Wuin's talent, he was a complete accompaniment. If he were to go and compete with those prides, he would definitely die a horrible death. Therefore, Elder Li hoped that Zhu Wuin would recognize his shortcomings, cultivate at ease, and not think about things that were not realistic. The entire Liege One Hall was in an uproar as everyone was talking about Kang Chon's test results. Undoubtedly, this time Kang Chon was going to stir up the entire Dark Gold Peak again. Zhu Wuin, on the other hand, kept his head lowered, not knowing what he was thinking about until Kang Chon and Little Gold's backs disappeared into the distance, and only then did he slowly raise his head. Elder Li had been paying attention to him, and when he saw this, he patted his shoulder and sighed. Wuin. The words were not finished, but they had already been interrupted by Zhu Wuin. Elder, no need to say anything. I understand that it was me who was too conceited in the past. In the future I will cultivate without fear, and will not let you worry anymore. Zhu Wuin lifted his head and said calmly. Only the flash of despondency in his eyes was still discovered by Elder Li. Elder Li secretly sighed at his words, knowing that, although this disciple of his was unwilling in his heart, he had also seen the reality clearly from this incident, which made him feel much more at ease. Senior, tomorrow, I'm going to head to the Orthodox Demon battlefield, Zhu Wuin said softly. Elder Li nodded at his words. A fledgling eagle always needs to go through constant training before it can spread its wings and fly. The Orthodox Demon battlefield was the best place for the Heavenly Tao sect to train those geniuses. Brother, you just now didn't see that face of Zhu Wuin's that blackened. Haha. Let's see how arrogant he dares to be in the future. He doesn't look at what he is. How dare he compare with his brother? To unself-consciously on the way back, Little Gold was very happy, talking and laughing all the way, looking very pleased with himself. All right, it's time for us to go and say goodbye to our master. Kang Chon shook his head somewhat breathlessly, interrupting Little Gold's continued slander. If Zhu Wuin heard it, he would have to be furious. Xiaojin also stopped talking after hearing this. He knew that this kind of person like Zhu Wuin was destined to be a passerby. In Kang Chon's life, belonging to that kind of passerby or something like that, there was no need to pay too much attention to it. The two of them immediately went to the place where the law enforcement elder lived. ready to pay their respects to the law enforcement elder, and then return to the Great Tang country. However, the law enforcement elder was not in the Heavenly Tao sect, did not know where he had gone. Kang Tian did not care about this. Like the law enforcement elder and other strong people, always a dragon's head, he immediately took Xiao Jin to leave the Heavenly Tao sect, embarked on the return journey back to the Great Tang country. The Heavenly Tao sect's domain was vast and boundless, and the Great Tang country was just a small country in the middle of nowhere, very far away from the Heavenly Tao sect's mountain gate. Back then, when the Thunder King had harnessed a treasure artifact level airship, it had also taken a month or so to bring them to the Heavenly Tao sect to participate in the holy ceremony. However, this time, there were only Kang Tian and Xiao Jin, and they chose another way to return to the Great Tang country altogether, and that was the teleportation array. For the kingdoms within their own territory, the Heavenly Tao sect's control was still very strict. They had arranged a teleportation array each of the kingdoms, and could send experts to reach any of the kingdoms within their domain at any time. However, there was a limit to the number of people in the teleportation array, and each teleportation would cost a lot of spirit stones. And for non-important matters, these teleportation arrays were rarely activated. At least so far, it had been 300 years since anyone had used these teleportation arrays. The other inner disciples who went home relied on their own flights to get back. The big deal was that it took a few months. They didn't care at all. But Kang Tian was different. He had already returned long ago, and couldn't wait to return to the Great Tang Kingdom in his heart, so he chose to take the teleportation array. The star peak within the Heavenly Tao sect. This was the center of the Heavenly Tao sect's transportation agency, with many teleportation arrays laid out on it, all leading to various places. Kang Tian found the teleportation array to the Great Tang country here, and placed 18 extremely high-grade spirit stones into the teleportation array, preparing to open it. On the side, Xiao Jin said with a face full of pain, "This teleportation array is also too extravagant. One time it costs 18 extreme-grade spirit stones. I'm afraid that not many people in the Heavenly Tao sect would be willing to sit on it." Xiao Jin was right. One time cost 18 extreme spirit stones. It was no wonder that no one had used these teleportation arrays for 300 years. Thinking about it, for Yuanying stage and out-of-body stage cultivators, 18 extreme spirit stones was not a small amount of money. If it wasn't too important, no one would be so extravagant. As for the powerhouses above the divine separation stage, they could completely instantly move at a very high speed. So naturally, they didn't bother to use the teleportation array. "Get ready. I'm going to start the activation." Listening to Little Gold's nagging, Kang Tian ignored him and instead placed the extremely high-quality spirit stones and opened the teleportation array on its own. Amidst a blinding blazing light, the figures of both Kang Tian and Little Gold disappeared into the teleportation formation. Alas, young people nowadays are really big spenders. Such a small journey will cost 18 extreme spirit stones. Losers are. At the moment Kang Tian and Xiao Jin left, a crane-haired old man strolled in. He shook his head and sighed with his hands behind his back. Between one step, he crossed the layers of space, and in a single step, he crossed the layers of space, and in a single step, he crossed the layers of space. In between, he crossed the layers of space, and then disappeared into the sky. There were rumors in the Heavenly Tao sect that there was a supreme powerhouse of the Heavenly Tao sect guarding the Star Peak, known as the Star Elder, only that very few people had seen him. In the Great Tang country, deep within the forest of demonic beasts, two figures steeply appeared in a hidden cave. "Brother, what part of the Great Tang country is this? Why do I feel somewhat familiar? It's really strange." A teenager around 15 or 16 years old looked around with a puzzled face. Next to him, a purple-robed youth around 20 years old walked out of the cave, his gaze looking at the lush forest outside the cave. He said with some surprise, "If I didn't guess, this should be the forest of demonic beasts of the Great Tang Kingdom. Back then, we had spent quite a lot of time cultivating here, and this is also where you cross the Jidan stage heavenly tribulation." That's right. These two people who suddenly appeared in the forest of demonic beasts were none other than Kangchan and Xiaojin, who had returned from the Heavenly Dao sect. They didn't think that the Heavenly Dao sect had actually arranged a teleportation array in the forest of demonic beasts. But it was no wonder. This place was filled with demonic beasts and belonged to a place that was rarely visited. And with the teleportation array arranged here, naturally, no one would find it.